It was May 19th, 1962. Madison Square Garden. 18,000 people packed into their seats. The most powerful man in the world sat in the front row. And then she walked out. Marilyn Monroe, draped in a dress so sheer, so impossibly tight with rhinestones sewn directly into the fabric that she had to be literally sewn into it backstage. She could barely walk. She could barely breathe. But she walked to that microphone anyway, and she sang 12 words that would echo through history forever. "Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, Mr. President." The crowd erupted. John F. Kennedy leaned back and laughed. He took the microphone after and said, and these are his exact words, "I can now retire from politics after having had happy birthday sung to me in such a sweet, wholesome way." The audience roared. Everyone laughed. Everyone smiled. But here is what nobody in that room knew. Here is what the cameras didn't catch. Here is what decades of sealed files, buried testimonies, and classified communications have slowly, painstakingly been forced into the light. What happened after that night is one of the most consequential, most dangerous, and most deliberately hidden stories in modern American history. Because Marilyn Monroe sang for JFK on May 19th, 1962, and less than 3 months later, she was dead. Stay with me, because this story is far bigger than most people know. Let's go back to that evening, because the details matter more than most people realize. The event was a massive Democratic Party fundraiser, officially organized to celebrate President Kennedy's 45th birthday, which was actually 10 days away, on May 29th. But this was the party. This was the moment. Peter Lawford, Kennedy's brother-in-law and one of Hollywood's most connected insiders, personally arranged for Marilyn to perform. There was just one problem. Marilyn almost didn't show up. She was already in a fragile state. She had been fired from her film Something's Got to Give by 20th Century Fox just days before the event. Fired mid-production, publicly humiliated, her mental health in a visible downward spiral. Studio executives had been documenting her absences and erratic behavior for months. Her co-star Dean Martin had threatened to walk if she was replaced. The production was a disaster, and yet she got on that plane to New York. She showed up. She stood backstage for nearly an hour, kept waiting, while the announcer repeatedly told the crowd she was late and teased her arrival. Peter Lawford called her the late Marilyn Monroe as an introduction joke, a phrase that, given what happened next, has haunted historians ever since. When she finally stepped out, there was a collective intake of breath from 18,000 people. The dress alone became instantly iconic, later auctioned for nearly $5 million. But it wasn't just the dress, it was the way she sang, slow, intimate. Almost like a secret being whispered to one specific person in a room full of thousands. Jackie Kennedy was not there that night. The First Lady was away. That absence was noticed then. It has been analysed relentlessly ever since. Now, here is where the story shifts, because what the public saw that night was a performance. What was happening beneath the surface was something else entirely. By May 1962, the relationship between Marilyn Monroe and John F. Kennedy was not a rumor. It was not tabloid gossip. It was a known reality inside certain circles of Washington, Hollywood, and the FBI. And J. Edgar Hoover, the director of the FBI who had terrifying leverage over nearly every powerful person in America, knew all of it. Hoover had been surveilling Marilyn Monroe. Her phone was tapped. Her associations were monitored. Her conversations were recorded. The FBI had compiled a file on her that ran to hundreds of pages, a file that detailed not just her relationship with JFK, but her connections to left-wing political figures, her growing interest in social causes, and most critically, what she may or may not have known about the president's private conversations. Because here is the thing about Marilyn Monroe that gets lost in the mythology of the blonde bombshell. She was extraordinarily intelligent. She read voraciously. She kept a diary. She wrote poetry. She was intensely curious about power and politics. And she was spending time with the most powerful man on earth, a man whose administration was navigating the Bay of Pigs fallout, the early spiraling of Vietnam, the terrifying chess match of the Cold War, and back-channel negotiations that the American public would not learn about for decades. What did Marilyn Monroe know? What had she heard? What had she written down? Those questions have never been fully answered, and they may be precisely why what happened next happened the way it did. After that night at Madison Square Garden, something changed. The access stopped. Robert Kennedy, the Attorney General, the president's brother, and a man who had his own complicated relationship with Monroe, reportedly delivered a message. The relationship with the president was over. She was not to call. She was not to reach out. She was, in the language of powerful men protecting powerful men, to be managed out. By most accounts, Marilyn Monroe did not take this quietly. She reportedly made phone calls, she wrote things down. There are accounts, some documented, some disputed, that she reached out to journalists, that she threatened, consciously or not, to speak publicly about what she knew or what she had experienced. The Kennedy circle tightened, the phones kept being monitored, the surveillance intensified. And then came August 4, 1962. Marilyn Monroe was found dead at her home in Brentwood, Los Angeles. She was 36 years old. The official cause of death was ruled acute barbiturate poisoning, classified as a probable suicide. What followed was one of the most contentious and continuously re-examined verdicts in American forensic history. The Los Angeles Police Department conducted an investigation. The district attorney's office reviewed the case. The coroner issued his report. And on paper, it was closed. Except it wasn't. The toxicology was unusual. The timeline of events that night, who was where, who called whom, what time various people arrived at and left the house, has been contested by witnesses, neighbors, and investigators for 60 years. A key piece of evidence, the housekeeper, Eunice Murray, gave multiple conflicting accounts of that evening over the course of her lifetime. In a BBC interview filmed late in her life, she appeared to revise her account significantly, and then the interview was quietly shelved. Phone records from that night have never been fully released. Marilyn's phone logs showed calls to and from numbers connected to the Kennedy circle. Those records, in the hands of investigators at the time, subsequently disappeared. The ambulance driver who responded to the scene gave an account suggesting Marilyn was still alive when he arrived, an account that contradicts the official timeline. He was largely ignored during the original investigation. He kept talking for the rest of his life. Robert Kennedy's whereabouts that evening have been a subject of intense historical dispute. Multiple witnesses placed him in Los Angeles, including at Marilyn's neighborhood on August 4th. His official schedule said otherwise. His defenders have insisted the witnesses were mistaken or lying. His critics have never stopped asking why the question was met with such fierce resistance. In 1982, the Los Angeles District Attorney's Office reopened a limited inquiry into the death. They concluded there was insufficient evidence to reopen the criminal investigation. Many of the files from that inquiry were subsequently sealed. Some have since been released, partially. Others remain classified or are reported missing entirely. Here is what often gets overlooked when people tell this story. The death of Marilyn Monroe did not just devastate those who loved her, it sent a shockwave through American political culture that reverberated in ways we are still measuring. The FBI's surveillance apparatus, already monstrous in scope under Hoover, expanded its reach into celebrity and cultural figures with renewed intensity after 1962. The lesson, if there was one being absorbed in those corridors of power, was that no one outside the official structure was safe from scrutiny. No one with proximity to the powerful could be fully trusted. The Kennedy administration itself became more insular. The circle around JFK tightened. The internal culture of secrecy, already significant, deepened. And then, 16 months after Marilyn Monroe died, John F. Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas. The proximity of those two deaths, both violent, both premature, both officially closed in ways that enormous portions of the public have never accepted, became impossible to ignore. Conspiracy theorists drew lines, historians pushed back, but the questions kept multiplying because the official answers kept containing gaps. We are not saying those deaths are connected. We are saying that the culture of concealment that surrounded both of them came from the same source, a political system that had decided, at the highest levels, that certain truths were too dangerous to be public. This story, Marilyn, JFK, the surveillance, the death, the cover-up questions has never gone away. And in the era of declassification, of FOIA requests, of aging witnesses finally speaking, and of historians gaining access to archives that were locked for decades, it keeps getting new chapters. FBI files released in recent years have confirmed what many suspected. The level of surveillance on Marilyn Monroe was extraordinary, even by the standards of the Cold War paranoia that defined that era. She was watched not because she was a security threat in the traditional sense, but because of who she knew and what she might say. Recordings, the existence of which has been alleged for decades, remain a subject of enormous controversy. Former investigators, journalists, and individuals connected to organized crime figures, who were themselves surveilling Monroe, have claimed that audio recordings from her home exist. Where those recordings are, if they exist, is unknown. They have never been produced publicly. They have never been confirmed officially. But the claims keep surfacing. Robert Kennedy's biographers have wrestled with this chapter of his life for years. The most honest among them acknowledge that the historical record here is genuinely incomplete. The most hagiographic insist there is nothing to see. The truth almost certainly lies somewhere in between, in the documents that haven't been released, in the recordings that may or may not exist, in the testimonies of people who are now, one by one, running out of time to speak. Marilyn Monroe's personal diary, a red leather book she reportedly carried with her during the final months of her life, has never been found. Accounts of its existence come from multiple credible sources. Its disappearance has never been explained. We are living in a moment where the distance between icon and human being is collapsing, where the mythology built around figures like Marilyn Monroe is being actively dismantled. Not to diminish her, but to see her clearly for the first time. She was not just a symbol. She was not just a body in a dress singing to a president. She was a woman of extraordinary complexity and intelligence who was used by powerful men, surveilled by the state, discarded when she became inconvenient, and then transformed in death into exactly the kind of passive, tragic symbol she had spent her life trying to escape. The documentary work, the historical revisionism, the literary reconsiderations, they keep coming because Marilyn Monroe's story keeps demanding to be told more honestly. The 2022 film Blonde reignited global conversation. The Ana de Armas portrayal drew hundreds of millions of views and billions of words of commentary and controversy. People are not done with this story because the story is not done with us. There is a generation of people watching right now who were born decades after Marilyn Monroe died, who have never seen her in a film, who know her face only from posters and memes, and they are furious about what happened to her. That fury is a form of clarity. It means we are finally seeing what people in 1962 were not allowed to say out loud. A woman was surveilled, silenced, and died under circumstances that powerful people went to extraordinary lengths to obscure. And the man she sang to, the man who leaned back and laughed and joked about retiring from politics, was gone 16 months later, his own death wrapped in its own impenetrable layers of official story and unofficial doubt. So what happens now? The declassification of government documents from this era is ongoing. FOIA requests continue to produce new fragments, sometimes maddeningly small, sometimes genuinely significant. Historians are working with archives that were sealed for decades. Witnesses are aging, and with age sometimes comes a willingness to finally say things that fear kept quiet for a lifetime. There are individuals still alive who were in rooms. There are files still locked in federal archives. There are recordings whose existence is alleged and whose location is unknown. There are gaps in the official record that are too specific, too consistent, and too convenient to be explained by simple bureaucratic failure. The story of Marilyn Monroe and John F. Kennedy is not a story that ended on August 4, 1962, or November 22, 1963. It is a story that is still being written, slowly, painfully, in the spaces between what governments release and what they keep, between what witnesses say before they die and what they took with them. She walked to that microphone on May 19, 1962, in a dress she could barely breathe in, and she sang 12 words to the most powerful man in the world. The crowd went wild, the cameras flashed. Kennedy laughed. And then everything changed, the full truth of what changed and why, and who made sure the rest of us wouldn't know, that is still out there. And when it finally comes, it is going to rewrite history.